directness means I care. If I don't talk to you, that's when you should worry because I can't be bothered talking to you. Although it is a technology, I see this as a change in the way we're working, and we need to all respect it and get on board. But I think we need to look at it truly from a different way of working. It's not done simply as a top down because you need people to be executing against that strategy. And oftentimes the individuals, the middle management, they actually know what actually works and what doesn't. The E3 leadership code, which is really a system to help leaders drive success. You need to be able to express and envision. And you have to have engagement, and that's the express plus engage. And then the third leg of that stool is execution.
Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of Business Unbound. Every week, I sit down with exceptional practitioners who share how they actually think about the most consequential matters in their own domain. We will explore the mental models, frameworks, and instincts they have developed over the course of their careers. You get what it took them decades to build in one conversation, and you leave with sharper thinking for the decisions you face. I'm your host, Florian Hoff. Today, I'm joined by Katie Eastwood. Katie is the CEO and founder of E=Y, where she works with senior leaders across industries on the specific challenges of turning leadership clarity into consistent execution. But before founding the firm, Katie actually built a real cross-functional career. She started as a CPA at EY, then moved through technology companies across services, sales, R&D, support, marketing, and HR before actually stepping into a C-suite role herself, including chief of staff for a $2.6 billion software business. And she also was the chief people officer at a private equity-backed technology company, where she led work including integrating 5 software acquisitions and automating contract operations across more than 300 employees. Today's episode is not about Katie's leadership framework as a product. It's about what sitting inside that many functions, that many leadership teams, and that many high-pressure execution environments has done to the way she sees organizations, the specific patterns she has learned to recognize in how leadership teams create or quietly destroy, the conditions for execution, the gap she sees consistently between what leaders believe they have communicated and what their teams actually hear, and the diagnostic signals she looks for when an organization's alignment is breaking down in ways its own leaders cannot yet see. If you want to understand why smart, well-intentioned leadership teams still produce confused execution and what the rare ones who get it right are actually doing differently, this conversation will sharpen how you see it. This is Business Unbound. Let's dive in. Katie Eastwood, welcome to Business Unbound.
Thanks so much for having me, Florian. I'm really excited to be here.
I am too. And Katie, before we get into the heart of our conversation, can you tell our audience members what you're working on right now? Like, what are you focused on and what does this involve day to day?
Sure. So what we're doing is partnering with companies that want to deliver high performance, right? Results matter. And what we're doing is helping equip managers and leaders to really lead through change by focusing on how to remove the friction from strategy to execution, because there tends to be a lot that drops out there. In fact, one of the statistics before we started the company that really got me focused on this is I go with less than 30%. Some people will say if you read the balanced scorecard, less than 10% of businesses actually achieve their raw results. If you talk to Bain, they'll tell you that 82% fail to drive change initiatives all the way through. And even looking at a lot of the PE firms, 70% of them are not hitting their projected goals. So that number, less than 30% are actually achieving results is a number that keeps me up at night. And why? Right. And that's what my mission on is, to help individuals, teams, and organizations to be in that 30% to achieve results. So I'm doing that through I've written the book, the E3 Leadership Code, A Human Approach to High Performance, and then also partnering with teams to help them figure out where that friction is and to remove that friction and deliver results.
And I propose before we go down further this rabbit hole, let's talk a little bit more about your background. And you have been inside organizations from, well, a wide range of positions. And you've also been within the C suite. And I'm wondering this cross functional vantage point that you have built over the course of your career. Can you explain, like, what did this reveal to you about, well, what actually works and what doesn't?
Yeah, it's interesting. And we were talking about this a little bit beforehand. I've not sit in just one seat, right? And having
Mhm.
that view across organizations, I think the biggest challenge we have is we too often think as silos, right? So if you're a CEO, you're like, I'm going to hire the best head of sales, the best chief people officer, the best CMO, the best CTO, right? I'm going to hire the best person that knows this. But too often, what happens is we dismiss the entire process across the entire organization and the results that we want to deliver. And as a company, that's the job, is to deliver results. But if each team is looking at things just, on their metrics and what they need to do, we're missing that interaction across the functions. And that's where success really happens, is when there's clarity, alignment, and execution, and trust. That's what drives companies forward.
Is this a different way of saying or using the common proverb that everyone is supposed to row in the same direction?
That's a perfect one, and it's funny, that's one of the pictures that I start with often when I meet with teams. I'm like, I'll show them a picture of a whole bunch of people in the ocean, right, swimming. And, so often as leaders, that's what we do. It's like, "Hey, go get to the ocean, jump in and swim." And you got, the heroes in there. All right, I got this. They're off on their own. You've got a group of people all thrashing about. Someone's kicking someone in the head. They don't mean to. They're trying their hardest. But as a leader, if you create the boat and get everyone in the boat, it's a lot easier to get to that island. And that's exactly what we're talking about: is how do you get everyone in the boat? And the journey is a lot quicker, and a better results.
Well, and then given the range of organizations and leadership teams that you have worked with, I would like to spend the heart of our conversation really on what you have learned to see the specific patterns that tell you where execution is breaking down and where real leadership clarity gaps exist versus where it is an illusion, perhaps. But before we get there, do you still recall what was a particular, almost like leadership situation that changed how you see the gap between what leaders believe they have communicated and what their teams actually heard?
Yeah, there's one that's really funny, and I was actually the leader, one of the leaders, thinking I had communicated well. I was the chief people officer. I was working with the CEO and the leadership team, and we were redefining the strategy. And we were doing a lot of work to put it in words that people would understand. We had it built out, and we were communicating it. And I felt we had been communicating it a lot. And one day I'm sitting with a couple of folks. I would go meet with different teams in our different offices and ask them, is, you know, what's going on? Is this working? And they said to me, they're like, well, they don't understand. And I said, well, who's they? Well, the leadership team up there. And I'm like, but that's me. And I'm like, all right. So as much as I think we're doing well, there's more to be done. And that was a real lesson, eye opener for me, is you need to really test if it is being absorbed by everybody in the company. It's so easy to think you're doing the right thing, but unless you know that everyone being absorbed, you're not succeeding.
How do you test for that?
One of the simplest things is to ask, right? To really meet with the frontline individuals, the managers, and ask them what they see as the strategy. What do they see we're doing? Why are we doing it? How do they fit into it? These are simple questions we can ask. But it's hard depending on where you are and how many layers there are from the CEO down to the individual. It can be hard, right? And it's easy when you're starting a new company because, as the founder, you're like, here's my vision, this is what we're doing. And you talk to your team on a regular basis and they can feel your energy, right? They can hear the conversations, the challenges. But if you have six layers between the senior apex leader, right, versus the individual, then you have to rely on those individuals in between to help in that communication.
And I would argue that strategy formulation and strategy communication is maybe not a linear process. And speaking from what I'm observing when I interact with businesses on a daily basis, sometimes my impression is that strategy only becomes clear in hindsight, that you set out with your first version of what you think your strategy is, and then you start telling and telling. And as you gather feedback and make adjustments only in like a couple of iterations down the road, it becomes a consistent way to think. It becomes more coherent. How would you respond to that?
I think that's true. It's iterative. And I think the real key, though, is that it's not done simply as a top down, right? Because you need people to be executing against that strategy. And oftentimes, the individuals, the middle management, they actually know what actually works and what doesn't. And so when you can bring them into the process, you can get clarity much quicker to know, is this reasonable? Is this going to work? Now, I'm not suggesting that everything needs to be done, from the bottom up, but there needs to be a good balance so that you are having a realistic understanding of what's going on and what will succeed. And how are you going to have to communicate it, quite honestly? Sometimes you already have the answer, but if you bring people into the process of defining it and refining it, they feel like they've been part of it, they've been heard, so they're quicker to adopt it.
So when you were in the C-suite, when you stepped into a new organization and you assumed a C-suite and executive role, what were the first things that you were looking for or are still looking for today? I mean, not the formal diagnostic criteria, but more like the actual things that your eye goes to that most people in the room are not paying attention to.
All right, and this was interesting because it is so, I want to say, simple, but something we don't do enough of, right? The first question is, what are we trying to accomplish? Right? And really asking people, what does success look like? And not, when someone says, oh, here's the deck, here's the strategy, it's like, well, okay, tell me more. And if they can articulate what it really looks like, what's going to be different as a result, how you'll know you're successful, then we're missing something, right? Because then we're left with assumptions. And we have a tendency, from my experience, to want to sound smart, right? But if my grandmother can't understand our strategy, we're going to struggle, right? So I know that, but it is true, right? Because we're looking at individuals that are being asked to step up and take on and think differently, to be innovative, to challenge the status quo. So if we can't really explain to them what and why, it's going to be hard. So that's question number one: is what does success look like? And I think about this back in my Ernst and Young days as an auditor. We had to understand the whole end process. What are we doing? Why are we doing? What does this look like? Because as an auditor, then I had to go figure out if there were any breakdowns, right? And what's happening. So that's question number one. Number two is everyone bought in? Right. So often I'll ask folks, I'm like, okay, so we know what success looks like. Is everyone bought it? And they'll say, oh, yeah, 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 yep, absolutely. And then the question comes, okay, how do you know that? What have you done to ensure that? How do you figure that out? And, a lot of times they're like, well, we had a town hall. We communicated it. We've sent out the docs or whatever. But we mentioned this earlier is you need to validate it and ensure that people are truly bought into it. And then the third question comes down to what processes do you have? What dashboards do you have? How are you going to measure success? Right? How do you ensure that you're making progress? Because a lot of folks get all excited. They put the vision out there. They're like, woohoo, we got it. Other leaders are really good at getting everyone rallied and riled and bought into the process. But if you don't deliver results, it's still just an idea. And so you need to have that structure, that process, that operational prowess to make sure that we're delivering on those results. So those are really like the three questions that I think about. And I think the one more that I'd add to this is what's the level of trust in the organization? And this one's hard, right? Because this one feels, and I use the word feel, like, well, they're just going to do what I tell them to do. If you don't have trust, this is all gonna be even harder to do.
Well, maybe a frank observation. What you explained, like the three elements, setting a direction, ensuring everyone is on board, and having KPIs and dashboards to measure this. This is nothing new. I mean, I remember many moons ago in business school, I learned about this. And I remember countless discussions from a decade ago where this was the exact challenge with leaders. So why do you believe it still is the case that we are talking about this and that organizations apparently haven't fully figured it out yet?
It's the day-to-day gets in the way, right? It is logical, and by the way, I say this in my book, I say it's not rocket science, but it is a framework and a methodology that does work, but we get caught up in the marketplace. Things get thrown at us left and right. Priorities change, right? New policies come in. You name it. We are all trying to do more with less and we forget the basics. It's a lot easier if you miss a metric to go and change the strategy rather than let's go back to the strategy and ask ourselves, is this still the right strategy? Is everyone still bought in? And what else do we need to do? Do we need to remove obstacles? Do we need to change something? And so we tend to just jump at, oh, it wasn't right. Let's go do it again, do something else. And that constant pivot causes, from my experience, a lot of getting off track on the basics that we need to do.
And practically speaking, when you work with leadership teams or when you were a C suite executive yourself, how would you make sure that there was sufficient priority to work on these exact topics and not get lost so much in day to day firefighting?
It's, I feel the word I use is a broken record,
Mhm.
right? And you have to keep going back to the basics, right? And asking these questions on a repet. Okay, do we know what we're trying to do? Are we aligned and are we following through? And so, setting up the meeting structure. And I'm not suggesting we need to have tons of meetings, but when are we going to review this? How are we going to know that we're off track? What are we going to do when we're off track? Right? Like it's making it front and center and building the habits and building the muscle for it. And so, as a chief of staff, for example, this was my job, right? Like, okay, what is the strategy? What does good look like? And then every week it was going back, are we on track? And sometimes it's as easy as we're green, we're good, let's go. But it was more about building a culture that looked at where we weren't on track and a culture that says, how do we improve this? How do we work together? And what do we need to change? So it's building that muscle of continuously looking at the results, adjusting, and moving forward and reviewing them again. And it's that repetitive nature, that rhythm that too often as humans, we get bored. Think about it. Like if you think about going to the gym, right? Like we all know what we should do about going to the gym. We know what good looks like, right? And we're like, yeah, yeah, we're going to do it. And we start the year off. We call them the January joggers around here where we live. We're like, oh, the January joggers are out because they start the new year. They're ready to go. And then by March, we're like, yep, JJs are gone because they've just fallen off. And that's our human nature. So you have to keep coming back to, all right, how do we make sure, how do we hold ourselves accountable? How do we hold others accountable? And having someone that comes in and just simply asks that question. That's why we have trainers, right, at gyms, because you're like, oh, I do have to get up and go to the gym, right? We don't think about leadership that way, but we have to train ourselves. We have to continuously do the right things, even when they're hard. They're not sexy. It's not, always fun, but it is what makes the difference over and over again.
I keep observing in my own work that some organizations, they end up setting up large PMO functions, even if embedded somewhere in the matrix, and that sometimes strategy implementation becomes like almost like a tracking exercise with different steering committees and reporting rounds, and that the individuals supposed to execute the actual strategy and do the hands-on implementation, they spend more time updating PowerPoint slides or status trackers, which then gets aggregated up in the organization. So maybe provocative question. Can't AI do all of this in the future? And what is the role of humans in this world?
Yes, I do think AI is going to make a huge difference and a huge help because, to your point, you're spending the time preparing the reports. I used to argue a lot about this, right? In my roles, we had some amazing advisors come in when I was in the C suite, and I'm like, I know what to do. I need the hands and the arms to do it, right? Like we need to be doing the stuff rather than reporting on it or analyzing it. I think that's where AI really will make a huge difference is to be able to do that analysis, to do the tracking, provide you the data. And then what is neat is the human element of it, right? Of making sure that people are on board. So AI could give us the tracking and say, we've done this, this, and this. Here's what's red. You still have to inspire and enable people to do the work. Now we could go down a whole nother rat hole. I'm happy to on AI and whether we'll have the people, AI can do some of the work. But right now we're in a position, right? You still need the individuals to do the hard work, right? And to change their behaviors. And, we talk about are people bought in? AI is a perfect example. Everyone's like, yeah, it sounds good. But are they really bought into it? Or are they just saying they're into it, right? Are they committed? And that's what we need to spend our time on is helping people get from point A to point B and not just do the reporting.
And let's stick with this from point A to point B, perhaps. And you have sat in leadership team meetings over and over again. And I'm certain there were many of those team meetings where leadership, they believe they had been clear. You named an example early on. Can you walk me through the specific mechanisms that you have observed by which leadership intent gets distorted, diluted, or lost as it moves through an organization? Like, what is it that happens?
I think the best way to think about it is the telephone game. If you've ever played that as a kid, or even, we've done it in team building things, people have their own personal ideas. They also carry their own, I call it feud, fear, ego, uncertainty, and doubt. And they also have their own with them. What's in it for me? Why should I why should I bother? Right. So if we think about the human side of all of this, and everyone in the process, in that chain, has their own fear and their own with them, as you start to communicate, if you're communicating with only one style, that will either there's a barrier or it will be amplified, right? Depending on each person's filter. And that's where we have to think about how is my message being crafted? How is it being cascaded? Because a town hall, one time talking about it isn't enough, right? There's some people that absorb information orally, others need to read it Other people need to embrace, feel it. So we need to understand how people absorb information and how they're going to move from point A to point B. And this is change management of really understanding how do we change this message to help get everyone on board and make sure that message cascades. Because I have seen it way too many times that it gets stuck somewhere at the management level because the manager like, oh, yep, seen this. We've done this before. This isn't going to work. I'll take the responsibility in telling their team, don't worry about it. Just ignore what they're saying because it's going to change in 2 days. Right. I've been part of these communications where people will blatantly tell their teams to ignore it. And I often, there's a meme that's out there on whether a manager should have an umbrella or, like this funnel. And I struggle a lot of times with the meme that says a manager should hold an umbrella and shield their people from what's happening, because that is the worst thing I think that can happen for an organization. The manager should be the funnel coming through to be able to take that information, repackage it, re-explain it with the filter and the lens that's going to be important for their team so that the team knows it, feels it, and is on board with it. So it really is, there's a lot of layers depending on how big your organization is, right? A lot of layers where it can block what we're doing, it could just ignore it, or it gets interpreted a very different way.
So, what does good look like actually? Maybe you have a concrete example from your own corporate experience where you say, this was the strategy, it was executed very well. What's the blueprint?
Yeah. And, I'm going to bring a little stuffed animal to come in on my side here because you're like, where is she going with this? Um, we were at a large corporation, right? And we had a lot of silos, right? So sales, marketing, R&D, support, everyone was working in isolation. And what we realized is we weren't meeting the marks, right? Because of these silos, we weren't delivering the results that we needed to. And we said, we need to break this down. We need to break down the business units into smaller units, and cross functionally, we need the teams to work together for these units. Now, everyone is in that mindset of, I have to succeed. I have to deliver sales. My support numbers need to be up. And so, how do you break that down? Because everyone's trying, no one wakes up with bad intent. That's one of my heuristics, right? Like, if you have to believe that no one wakes up with bad intent. And so, what we ended up doing is going into the desert one day. And it was literally, let's go to the desert
Like
and
a
let's
literal
come
desert?
together. We went to the desert in Israel with the leadership team.
Okay.
And we sat down and got to know each other, and we built trust. And, it was why were people fearful to share? Why were people fearful of, or what were they uncertain about? What were they doubtful about? We really came together and bonded and built trust as a leadership team. And that's why I say this is my nephew's webkin. He's autistic, and he had given me the stuffed animal to bring with me on the trip so I could bring pictures back. Well, the team started taking pictures of Eddie, our buddy, on cactuses, on the truck as we're going out on a team building exercise. And what I realized at that point is we were aligning around a stuffed animal. We were aligning around something personal. We were building trust. Now, this was just the R&D team and starting with. So I'm like, all right, we got this. As the chief of staff, I'm thinking, this is trust now. We're on board. So we came back and we said, all right, what do we need to do to succeed? And we looked at the strategy and we started to build out the strategy for success. And then we started to bring in the other teams, the sales teams, the marketing teams, the support team. And we ended up calling the program Align with Eddie because it was a rallying cry. It was an opportunity to say, hey, this is what we need to do. We need to come together as one. We need to break down these silos. This is what we need to be doing and why we're doing it. We set out the purpose for everyone to get on board. And then we started the communication and having the town halls, having champion groups, right, to make sure that the message was cascading down. And we continue to just keep breaking down those silos, talking about, what are we trying to do and why? What's it going to take for you? Why should you care? Why should you be bought in? What's your WIFM? What are you scared of? How can we remove those? And then it was the program management, right? Going back through looking at the metrics. Are we making progress? Are we tracking to what we need to do? What barriers do we need to remove? And this was an iterative process that we just kept going through. And it took discipline and rhythm to keep going through it, right? And we did break down the silos and we changed how we went to market as one consistent team to deliver on those results.
And in this particular situation, I mean, you explained that you tried to bring, especially leadership in the first step, on the same page. But how do you differentiate between leaders who take genuine ownership in the strategy and leaders who comply but without commitment?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, it, it takes time, right? And it takes repetition. Um, because I, I do something that's really very simple. Because so often we get stuck around the metrics. What's the right metrics we need to measure? How do we hold people accountable? But I like to simplify it to start with a red, yellow, and green. Just do a heat map, right? And ask yourself, is this person 100% on board? Is that green? Do they believe in the strategy and are they bought into it, right? Are they committed to it? And then, understand that you can ask them, are you committed, right? Red, yellow, and green, tell me where you stand. And then you continue to ask them and say, well, what would it take you to be 100%? How are you demonstrating that you're on board? What help do you need? Really about connecting with the individuals. And I think this is where sometimes what we forget is we assume that it can just be cascaded down, but we have to stop and talk to the people. We have to bring the people on the journey with us because they are the ones that will give you lip service if they're not truly committed. And so you know who is and who isn't, but you have to do the hard work to find those answers.
What do you do with those leaders who come out on the red side of the analysis?
Sit down direct and have direct conversations. Ask the question, do you understand what the strategy is? Do you know why we're doing this? And are you on board? Right? And when you start to have those conversations, sometimes it's they didn't understand. And so those are the easy conversations. You're like, okay, let's get together. Let me explain this. Do you have what you need to be successful? Um, and they can then start to move, over into the green area. Some people are not going to get on board, and those are the people that are not in the right positions, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I've been in organizations that don't believe in the strategy, right? A perfect example, if you're decentralizing an organization or centralizing it, that's a philosophy or a mental model of what you feel works or doesn't. For some people, they cannot get on board with a centralized model. And even when you try to explain it, you give the why, you give the how, the difference is going to be, it just doesn't feel right for them. They're not comfortable. Then that model is not right for them. And everyone should find a new position for them, right? Not every position is right for every single person at a given time. And that's okay. But my biggest ask always is to make sure that everyone understands it. What is required, why, what are we doing, what we need, and be very articulate about it so they have a choice to be on board or not. And so then it really does become a choice one of, are you committed? And if so, then we're going to hold you accountable. And what else do you need to be successful? It comes down to the conversations.
What was the perhaps hardest, let me call it leadership situation that you have been in, either as an advisor or as an executive yourself?
um, I think it's the hardest are always when you're going through a contraction, and financially, you have to make some really tough decisions. That's always the hardest. And, having to restructure, reorganize, unfortunately, having to let people go, that's the worst part of, I think, being a leader. But unfortunately, it happens. And so then you have to figure out, how do I message this? How do I help people exit with dignity and respect? How do I inspire and enable those that are staying? It's a whole change that requires its own process in of itself.
And I think this possibly flips the script a little bit. I mean, we've been talking about strategy and how you communicate and how you bring people on board, which had a very positive connotation, transformative. We're getting there, we're rowing in the same direction. Now, the situation you explained, it's, I guess, also a strategy. Contraction, restructuring can be part of a strategy, most certainly. To what extent does this change how you think about how you get people on board with this strategy?
I don't think it changes a lot, quite honestly. It goes back to, what is the strategy and why, right? Like, what I've learned, people care, right? And people understand. They're much more understanding than I think we give them credit for a lot of times. And the best thing we can do is explain what's happening and the why, right? And obviously you can't give all of the details, and you know, it's not always as cut and dry as what I'm saying, but when people understand what's happening and you share it, they can get it. Where people really struggle most is when they're in the dark and they don't feel like they've been considered. They don't feel like everything has been um, evaluated, right? So when people feel valued, when they feel included, then it's easier for them to get on board. So it really does start with explain what you're doing and why. So it goes back to that express the end vision. Um, we had one situation, you mentioned it in the opening, where we were automating our contract operations. It was a shared service we had teams in Romania and India and Costa Rica and 300-person organization. And we needed to automate that process. Now, we have a choice, right? I could have just simply said, it's going to happen. Here's the process. We need to automate, lay people off, and move on, right? Instead, what we did is we brought the leadership team together in a room and we asked them, what are the tasks you hate doing? What are the things that if we could automate? We asked them to come up with the solution and be part of the restructuring. And they all joined in and helped. And they helped find new jobs for everyone in their teams, right? And it was a process. We knew that we were going to do it over a period of time, but they were part of the process rather than it happening to them. And, my director that was running that, he calls me up and he goes, I'm the last one, Kath. We're done. Let's go. Right. And you look at that process, that's when you can do something really hard and still do it and it feels good, if that makes sense.
It does. Well, let me just go a little bit off track here. Let's see where this leads us to. We talked about AI earlier. Now you spoke about automation and finding new roles for people who became obsolete in the automation process. If you transfer this to the adoption of AI as a technology in business, how do you see it?
Interesting you said technology. I actually see it, although it is a technology, I see this as a change in the way we're working. And so this is a massive change that's happening, right? And we need to all respect it and get on board. Um, but I think we need to look at it truly from a different way of working, right? What's going to change? How is it going to show up? What does success look like? So if we start to apply these four questions again, what does success look like? What's going to be a different as a result of it? What tasks are we going to be able to use AI for so that we have better accuracy? We are the routine tasks, are off our plates. Um, how can we move things through the process faster, right? We have to ask all those questions and really define that end vision. What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? How are we going to feel differently? And why are we doing this, quite honestly? What we don't wanna be doing is AI for the sake of AI. We have a job as a business, and that's to deliver results. So we have to come back to what is the outcome we truly want, and how is this AI going to help us get those results? And then next, we have to get the people bought in, right? We go back to our change methodology. Um, but what are people fearful of, right? We have to address the fear, the egos, the uncertainty and doubt that every one of these people have. And we all do. And if we say we don't have any feud about this, we're lying. And then we need to look at the with them. What's in it for each individual? And if we can get them on board, then they're going to be part of the process. They're going to be committed to it. They're not just going to go along for compliance, but you start talking to teams that want to do better. I was interviewing a chief product officer last week, and they've implemented AI in all of their development. And he said it was amazing. He said, yes, it was hard at first for the developers to realize that what would take them 6 months to code a product, he said, we got it down to a month, right? That's a huge difference. And then that's scary, right? When you think about roles. He goes, but my team didn't just take it on to get it down to a month. They challenged themselves to get it down to 2 weeks, right? So he changed their mindset to be curious, to be competitive, to want to do it differently. That's commitment, right? And that's when you can change people's mindset and you change the culture and you bring curiosity into it and courage and authenticity, right? You bring all of this emotional intelligence into play to help bring people along in this process.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate that you also mentioned earlier that the overarching framework, how you bring a strategy across, that you bring people on board, that you set the direction, also doesn't change in terms of like, is it a positive strategy or is it maybe a contraction strategy? Is it automation? Is it AI? Read it correctly in my research. You've also come up with a framework around this: express, engage, and execute. Can you explain this framework for the benefit of our audience members, perhaps?
Yeah, I will. And thanks. And I'm going to actually take it one step further. It's a framework and a methodology. And I bring that distinguishing point up because I think of frameworks of the what you need to do and the why you need to do it. And then the methodology is the how, right? So the intention here is I call it the E3 leadership code, which is really a system to help leaders drive success. And if you think about a three-legged stool, this is one of the best visuals I can think of for you is you need to be able to express and envision. And I've talked, these are the four questions, the three questions, right? This isn't going to surprise anyone. You got to express the envision. Where are we going? What we doing? The second leg is you need to make sure you have buy-in, right? You have to have engagement, and that's the express plus engage. So we have buy-in from all of our folks and alignment. And then the third leg of that stool is execution, right? We have to have the rhythm. We have to drive things forward. We need to have that operational prowess and that rhythm. So that's the three legs. The seat of this is then the emotional intelligence. That's the glue that keeps all this together. right? Because you could have a great strategy, you could have, you know, people say they're bought in, you could, have executing a, operational rhythm. But if you don't have trust, if you don't have the people on board, if you don't connect with the individuals, if you don't bring curiosity to the table, those legs are just going to fall apart, right? That's the glue. It powers the results. And that's why this system, the framework and methodology really help leaders go back to the basics. And it is another way to visualize it is a Venn diagram. All three: express, engage, execute. It's not linear, but it is continuous. And you can't just stop of, oh, here's the strategy. Yep, you're bought in. And now let's execute. When you're executing, you have to go back and test the strategy. When you need to go back and test if people are bought in. You have to change how to get people bought in. So you're continuously bopping between express, engage, and execute until you deliver on the results. And so, this um, operating system for leaders is what I'm really helping them understand. You need to keep going back to the basics. It is repetitive, but it works if you keep following it over and over and over again.
And let's see if we can actually take this one step deeper. When you are working with those leaders, when you are working with leadership teams, you get in there, it's a new assignment, a new engagement, you get to know them. And if you had to distill how you actually determine whether this particular leadership team is creating the conditions for genuine execution, what is it that you look for? How does your mind work, if you will, when you figure this out? And I'm not looking for a framework here, but I'm really looking for the things that you process, that you observe. Where do you turn to? What is more subtle than perhaps the framework that you just explained?
It actually is trust, and whether there's trust among the people. And this becomes a very soft, it's often viewed as a soft skill or something that's not necessarily tangible, but that's what makes or breaks an organization, quite honestly. Because if there's no trust there, you might get short-term results. You can use command and control and tell people what to do for a short term for results. But if you want people thinking out of the box, being innovative, trying new things, feeling comfortable to tell you when something's wrong, you have to have trust. And so that's some of the questions I'll ask is, do people feel comfortable telling you your idea isn't good? Are people looking for ways to improve your processes? Um, you know, is one team helping the other team? It might be, what are your metrics? Are your metrics siloed that, only sales worries about sales, R&D only worries about time to market, like getting the product out? Or are you looking at metrics that are at the company level and that you're all working together for, that common goal and that everyone's playing a part in the overarching goals of the company?
But then in this context, I mean, what does trust really mean for you? You trust someone that he will be able to figure it out. You trust someone to keep their word. You trust someone that they have the right capabilities for a given situation. What is trust?
That is a great question. And it means something different for every person. So I hate to say it depends. But at its fundamental, we trust that someone is going to deliver on what they said. You trust that someone has your back, that there's psychological safety, right? And you trust that they have the best interest in the company and the team, et cetera, on where you're going, right? That they're knowledgeable. That's a big one, right? You need to trust that they're knowledgeable. Um, and one of the ways to do this is to help people understand that they're all similar, right? So one of the first exercises that we'll do when we come into a team is ask the group to share their values, right? What do you value? And to do that exercise and why, right? So that people understand, wow, this person really values taking the initiative, or this person really values psychological safety. And when the teams explain their why behind it, it helps to understand people's behaviors and how they're showing up. So I had one CEO, for example, it was a, s- a significant startup. It was executing well, but he wanted it to go a little bit further. They had kind of stalled in their procedures and where they were going. And I said, "Well, what's one of the challenges you're having with the team?" And he's like, "They're just not, I have to tell them what to do. I just want them to step up and do it." And I said, "All right, sounds good." But he was like, "No, we're all good. We're good." I'm like, "Okay." So we do this exercise of understanding our values and our non-negotiables and how we like to work. And everyone shares. And there's a lot of people that come at it from a very data-oriented, conscientious, detailed, state. I call it blue energy. And if anyone's familiar with Clarity 4D or Color Insights, right? Blue energy, that detail oriented, logical thinking. Other people were showing that they just wanted to have fun and, just tell me what to do and I'll do whatever you need me to do, right? Like all of these different personalities were in the room. And as the founder was doing his work, he realized that his values was family. And that family was everyone needs to get on board, um, and help each other out. And he said, growing up, my family had challenges. I had people that, we might be going and getting someone out of jail one day, helping feed someone the next day. But everyone, despite the dysfunction, everyone jumped in without asking and helping. And what he realized is that value of what's so important. He said, so when I raised my own family, I instilled those values in my family. Because so when I started this company, I instilled those values, right? In his mind, that is a value that is so important to him. I think you would say this is the heuristics, right? Like this is something fundamental to how you think and how you lead. He hadn't communicated that to his team. And so his team was bringing in their own values, their own way of working, and there was a disconnect. And so it felt like not necessarily having the trust or not working as a unified team to move forward quickly and to feel they were all on that boat together and that they had each other's back. So that's some of the efforts to build that trust and make sure that everyone is really on board, right? And believe and that you value the same things and or respecting if you're different. When I suddenly understand, oh, this person needs a detailed report before they can get moving, I got to make sure I help them get that detailed report. Whereas this one needs to make sure everyone's been considered, right? We need to think about how each person moves forward in their day-to-day work because we're all as similar as we all are, which are the values. We're all different. We bring a different flavor. And that's what makes teams hum and really create an energy that drives the results and creates that high performing organization.
Mm. And it also sounds like in this particular example for the CEO, it was also a journey, right? And they say we are not born with wisdom, we earn it. How has your own thinking actually changed over the course of your career, of like from your early days at EY until you were in technology companies, all the way through your executive positions and the advisory work that you do now?
I think it's the people aspect of change. Um, I grew up as a leader. I was very fortunate. I have some of the natural tendencies. I have a lot of red energy, means I run to the fire. I'm very results oriented, very operational in nature. How do we get stuff done? Right? You ask my husband, what do I do for a job? She gets stuff done. Right? That's just who I was known for. Um, So when I looked at that statistics, right, when I said less than 30%, I'm like, well, I'm one of those people that gets things done. But why? What am I doing differently? And I think what I was doing naturally didn't realize it. And what I really focus on now is to help people realize that a human centric approach is what actually will get you the results. And so I used to think it was as easy as a project plan. And as long as you had all the tasks, we were fine. But it's really the resource management element of, getting things done. Is how do you get people to move? Just telling them they have to do something is not enough. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. Like, we have to think about how do we inspire and enable people to do what we need them to do.
And this is then buying into the vision.
Yes, it starts with they need to be bought into it, right? And it's not just words on a slide. You need to be authentic as a leader and believe in it and inspire them and enable them, and speak their language, right? Um, this gets into the human side of it as well, but I'm sure you've heard of the golden rule to treat everyone the way you want to be treated. I challenge everyone to use the platinum rule. Treat everyone the way they want to be treated, because I am very direct and to the point, but not everyone takes that well. A lot of people think of that as, oh, she's being bossy, she's arrogant. But no, 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 I care, but that's just okay, I need to come back around and help people understand. No, my directness means I care. If I don't talk to you, that's when you should worry, because I can't be bothered talking to you. So it's the platinum rule helps get people on board, get them on the boat, get them rowing with you, backing everyone else up. And that's where you get the synergy of a team and really drive the results.
Now, Katie, before we start wrapping up our conversation for today, I think we've covered a lot of ground. What else is there that we should have talked about but haven't?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think it's just leadership isn't complex, right? You mentioned this early, and I think that's really important for people to understand. Most leaders know what they should be doing, but we have to keep remembering to go back to the basics, right? And really making sure that we're taking care of our people. Because when we take care of our people, that's when you're going to deliver results. It's not an either or. I think a lot of people think it should be results at all costs, or you care about your people. And in reality, the way to deliver high results and create a high performing culture is to inspire and enable your people so that they come on that journey with you and you're not pulling them, but they're pushing forward with you to deliver those results.
Then let's wrap up our conversation for today. And Katie, we have a closing tradition on this podcast. And based on your own experience, what you've gone through, what you're looking at right now, is there someone or something that is generally inspiring you in general, like a particular person, a book, an idea, or something else, either from your professional or personal life?
Yeah, I think it's conscious capitalism has been something for me. Yeah, it's a movement. I am actually on the board in New York City. But what we focus on is helping organizations understand this concept of capitalism is good. We have to deliver results, but you can do it by caring about more than just the shareholders, right? You need to have purpose more than just making profit. You need to care about all of your stakeholders, your vendors, your employees, your customers, right? And your shareholders. Um, and you need to be a conscious leader and have a culture that supports that. And the one of the things that goes along with that is the KKR shared leadership model, right?
Hmm.
Of really bringing back employee ownership into the mix where everyone is involved in it. So those are things that inspire me because it talks about servant leadership, and really looking at how to make that happen, but knowing that I love to deliver results. I'm very results oriented. So I'm always focused on how can we do that in the best way? And how can we improve profits, right? And profitability. And that's why these two elements are so important to me because there is another way, if you will.
It's a little bit against the good old Milton Friedman doctrine,
It is.
but I think there's a fair tendency. And well, I should give shout outs to recent guests that I had on the show, Nicola Clement. She thinks along the same and some along the same lanes. She's in e-commerce in Australia as a C-suite leader there, and she has the philosophy that if you want to be successful in business, you should really plan for the next 50 years, 50, not just for the next quarter or for the next year or something like this. And when you do this, when you consider the next 50 years, then the people element, the stakeholder element, suppliers, customers, contractors, you name it, they become a real integral part to the strategy.
Yeah. I agree on that. But that's sometimes hard in this day and age, right? We want instant results. We want to drive things forward. But I think what's powerful to think about it is for the short term, there is profitability for having a people first strategy. When you think about your people and you take care of them, then you retain them, their productivity goes up, they deliver more innovative solutions. With the people then elevated, they then treat your customers better. Your customers buy more, they refer, and then that drives your profit. And you create this virtuous cycle. And when you can stay in that virtuous cycle, you're making more money. And so that's where I look at it from the short term. I'm all in. I'd love to be thinking the 50 years, but I'm being practical, having been on the boards of companies and knowing they need the results. But there is proof that there is profitability in doing the right thing in the short term as well. Because otherwise you get into the vicious cycle, which is worse. And that's where we need to be careful. So I always help guide companies to think about the virtuous cycle so that they can improve profitability through the people first strategies.
Now and then, Kathy, if our audience members remember just one thing from our conversation, one insight, one way of thinking differently, or one action that they should take, what would you want that to be?
I would love them to remember the E3 leadership code. Express the end vision and why, engage people so they're bought in, and execute with rhythm and structure, all powered by emotional qualities. Show up with awareness, authenticity, curiosity, and you will succeed.
Well, Kathy Eastwood, thank you very much for coming on Business Unbound and for this conversation today.
Thanks so much, Florian. Appreciate it.